Chapter 2 Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting up his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismayingly real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they had gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up, but with never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. Then the feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By the time the sun was shining, the front door was open, letting in the warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room, by the open window, when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow, whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30, and they left you a message, but because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf, "you're not at all yourself this morning. You had never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This read, "Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo greetings. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our greatest acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not to exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All travel expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives, if occasion arrives and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking of it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await you, your respectable person, at Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain, yours deeply, Thorn and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You will have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo, "no time for that either. Off you go." By the end of his days, Bilbo could not remember how he found himself outside, without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or the usual things he took when he went out. Leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands, and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater, just on the stroke of 11, and he found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo," said Barlin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung with all kinds of baggage, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awful sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have to come without my hat. I left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I don't have any money. I don't get your note until about after 10:45, to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Barlin, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for the hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May, on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and dark green cloak borrowed from Dwarlin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. That's what his father Bungo would have thought, I dare think. His only comfort was he had mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe of tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merry. They told stories and sang songs as they rode forward all day, except for, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked, but still he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, on wide, respectable country, inhabited by decent folk, with good roads. An inn or two, and now then or then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead was dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for weather that day had not taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lowlands they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, and his pony was tired and stumbling on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. "I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling anything to do with it? I wish I was at home with my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time he wished for that. Still the dwarfs jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the great clouds the sun must have gone down, for it was beginning to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and the willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately the road went up over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with rain, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they crossed over. The wind broke up the grey clouds, and wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper, and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on. Not until did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he was simply not there at all. Just when a wizard would have been most useful too, groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the Hobbit's views about regular meals and plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees and thought it was drier than under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and then drip drip was most annoying. Also the mischief seemed to go into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Oin or Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out, Feli and Kelly were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper and less for breakfast. There they sat, all glum and wet and muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire, and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures were not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Barland, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off, with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees they could now see a light, shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as it might be fire torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for a while, they fell into arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could go and see. Anything was better than a little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all the night. The others said, "These parts are none too well known, and they are too near to the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old map says no use. Things have changed for worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king round here, and the less inquisitive you are as to go along, the less trouble you are likely to find. Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where has Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. The rain began to pour down, worse than ever, and Owen and Glowin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we have a burglar with us," they said, and so they made off, leading their ponies, with all due and proper caution, in the direction of the light. They came to a hill and were soon in the woods. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or farm. And do with what they could, they made a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, a good deal of grumbling and droughting, as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go and find out all about the light and what it is for, and it is perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the hobbit. "Now scuttle off and come back quick, if all is well. If not, come back if you can. If you can, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go before he could explain that he had never even hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more than a fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits could move quietly in the woods, absolutely quietly. They take a pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all this dwarvish racket. As they went along, they thought, "I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything at all on the windy night. Not if the whole Cavalanche had passed 2 feet off." As for Bilbo, walking primly towards the red light, I don't suppose even Weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anybody. And this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were roasting mutton on long spits of wood, and licking the gravy off their fingers. They had a fine toothsome smell. Also there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that from the great heavy faces of them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all. "Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if I don't look like mutton again tomorrow," said one of the trolls. "Never a blinkin' bit of man-flesh we had for enough," said a second. What the 'ell William was a-thinking of bringing us into the parch with all beats me. And the drink's running short, what's more," he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. "Shut your mouth," he said as soon as he could. "You can't expect folk to stop here for just to be et by you and Bert. You et a village and a half between you, since we came down from the mountains. But how much more do you want? And time's been up our way, when you'd have to thank you, Bill, for a nice big bit of fat valley mutton like this." He took a big bite off the sheep's leg he was roasting, and wiped his lips on the sleeve. "Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like this, even those who only one head each." After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have been back quietly and warned his friends that there is 3 fair-sized trolls at hand, in a nasty mood, quite likely to try roast a dwarf, or even pony for a change. Or else he should have done a bit of good, quick burglary. A real first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It's all nearly always worth while, if he can manage it, pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without their noticing. Others, more practical, but with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger in each one of them before they observed it. Then the night would have been cheerily spent. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and Company empty-handed. So he soon hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglaries proceeding, he had heard of picking the troll's pockets seemed to be the least difficult. So as he left, he crept up behind a tree just behind William. Bert and Tom were off to the barrel. William was having another drink, when Bilbo plucked up the courage and put his little hand into William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha, he thought. He warmed to his new work as he lifted it out carefully. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and there was no exception. Who are you? It squeaked, as it left the pocket, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck, before he could duck behind the tree. Blimey, Bert, look what I copped. What is it? The other's coming up. Loomy, if I knows. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a burra hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over, as he wondered how to make owl noises before they throttled him. A burra hobbit, said they a bit startled. Trolls are slow to the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What the burra hobbit got to do with my pocket, anyways, said William. And can you cook 'em? Said Tom. Yer can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. He wouldn't make above a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper. Not when he's skinned and boned. Perhaps there's more like him round here, and we might make a pie, said Bert. Here you, are you any more of you sneaking around the woods, you nasty little rabbits? He said, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. Yes, lots, before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all. No one, he said immediately afterwards. What do you mean? Said Bert, holding him right way up, by the hair this time. What I said, and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if you won't have me for supper. Poor little blighter, said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold. Also, he had lots of beer. Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to have my throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toast by the fire till he talks. I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway. You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, and I've said it afore this evening, and you're loud. And I won't take it from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert, and he put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and appreciable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in each other's arms, and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them back to their senses, and that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed by Bert's big hands. He had no breath in his body, and his head was going round. So there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight, up came Barlin. The dwarfs had heard the noise from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or a hoot like an owl, they started one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Barlin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarfs, uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately, and a sack, Tom, quick, so they said. Before Barlin, who was wondering where all the commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening, a sack was over his head, and he was down. There's more to come, said Tom, or I might be mistook. Lots and none at all, it is, he said. No burra hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it. I reckon you're right, said Bert, but we best get out of the light. And so they did. With sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows. As each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, and spilled jugs and gnawed mutton and supplies, pop, went a nasty smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwarlin lay by Barlin and Filly and Killy together, and Dory and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Bifer and Bofer and Bombor, piled uncomfortably near the fire. That'll teach 'em, said Tom, for Bifer and Bofer had given a lot of trouble, and fought like mad, as dwarfs will when cornered. Thorn came last, and he was not caught unawares. He had expected mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell that things were not all well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off and said, "What's all the trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks." "Oh, are they?" said Thorin as he jumped forward to the fire. Before they could leap on him, he caught a big branch all in the fire at one end, and Bert got the end of it in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was as thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning into the top of some bushes. Then Tom kicked the sparks into Thorin's face. Tom got a branch in his teeth for that, and lost one of his front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just as the moment William came up behind and popped his sack right over Thorin's head and down onto his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in the sacks, with 3 angry trolls and 2 with burns and bashes to remember sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush with all his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls were just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of arguing, they all agreed to it. "No good roasting them now. It'll take all night," said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. "Don't start the argument all over, Bill, or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William. He thought it was Bert who had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said Williams, and so the arguing began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a great black pot and took out their knives. "No good boiling 'em. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," they said, "or I'll never have done. You can fetch the water yourself if you want any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you? I'd like to know." "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over, and went on hotter than ever, until last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one, squashing them, and boil them next. "Who shall we sit on first?" said. "Better send the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom. "But if you wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stocking," said Bert. "Nonsense. The one with the gray stocking," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say gray for? I never did." "Tom said it." "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." "2 to 1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "That night's getting on, and Dom's coming early. Let's get on with it." "Don take you all to be stoned to you," said the voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't. For just that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on him, for trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they were made of, and never move again. That is what happened to Bert and Tom and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf as he stepped from behind the tree, and helped Bilbo to climb down out of the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that they had heard, keeping the trolls bickering and quarreling, until the light came up and made an end to them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed, and they had not at all enjoyed listening to the trolls make plans for roasting and squashing them and mincing them. They had heard Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over, before they were satisfied. "Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket-picking," said Bomber, "for you wasted my fire and food, when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you won't have got for the fellows without a struggle in any case," said Gandalf. "Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Do you realize that the trolls must have a cave or hole dug somewhere near to hide for the sun in? We must look for it." They searched round and soon found the marks of trolls' stone boots going up through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came up to a big door of stone leading into a cave. But they could not open it, not all though they all pushed, while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" said Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. "I found it on the ground where their trolls had the fight." He took out a large key, though had no doubt William had thought it was a very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't he mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it in the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor and a nasty smell was in the air, but there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on the shelves and on the ground. Among an untidy litter of plunder, all sorts from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in the corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls. I am afraid they belonged to victims, and among these were several swords of various makes, types, and shapes. Two caught their eyes particularly, because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for the troll, but it was a good short sword for the hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them but looking at them curiously. "They are not made by a troll, nor by any smith among men in the parts and days. But we can read the runes in them. We shall know more about this." "Let's get out of this horrid smell," said Philly. So they carried out the pots and coins, and soon the food was untouched and looked fit to eat. Also one barrel of ale which was still full. By the time they had felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, and did not turn their noses up to what they got from the troll's larder, their own provisions were very scanty. Now their bread and cheese, and plenty of ale and bacon to toast on the embers of the fire. After they slept, for their night had not been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies, carried away the pots of gold, and buried them very secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great deal of spells over them just in case they ever had a chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they had all mounted once more and jogged along the path and towards east. "Where did it go, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode. "To look ahead. And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," he said. "Exactly," said Thorin. "But could you be more plain?" "I went to spy out the road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends from Rivendell." "Where's that?" said Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and we'll find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of trolls. They'd told me there was three of them had come out from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everybody away from the district, and were waylaying strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or shall we never get anywhere?" "Thank you," said Thorin.